Hey, what's up? My name is Jose Duncan Jr., and I would like to welcome you to the Unnatural Born Leader podcast. Hey, what's up? Welcome to episode 40 of the Unnatural Born Leader podcast. Thank you for everyone who's tuning in today, and thank you for the continued support of the podcast. So, as a lot of you know, I don't have a lot of guests on the podcast. I appreciate my audience and being able to have you guys hear from my perspective on a lot of these self-improvement and leadership topics. But today I decided to bring on a new perspective, from an academic and more of an experienced professional. I think a lot of times that my perspective is limited to what I know and to what I believe. So when I get a chance to bring on powerful guests, I get really excited about it. So on today's episode is a interview with a family and marriage therapist. She's a licensed therapist out in Miami, Florida. Her name is Dr. Sylvia K. And she was someone I was able to connect with on Instagram a few months back, and we've been wanting to get into collaboration, and we finally got an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation, not only about her life, but also her practice as a licensed therapist and some of the things that are related to what we speak about here on the podcast. I know this last 2 weeks we've been focusing on self-awareness as a framework, building off of last week's episode, Trial and Error. Today, me and Dr. Sylvia explore unlearning and relearning from a habitual standpoint, also some behavior. So I'm excited to have you guys hear from her perspective as an experienced professional in the field and form your own opinions about this subject matter. So excited to get into this episode. So here we go, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, I have Dr. Sylvia. You got to help me with the last name because I'm not good at butchering people's last names. So I do have what's Dr. Sylvia.
So it's Kalicinski. You can remember it like California, your chin, and skiing down one of the California mountains. So Kalicinski.
Nice, that's wonderful. I think you've had to explain that to many people, so I'm glad that you've gotten it down packed. It's a pleasure having you here on Unnatural Born Leader podcast. I like having guests periodically, but when I do have guests, I do like to have women from different backgrounds just to give a new perspective to a male perspective. And I think it's important when we talk about leadership and development in any kind, especially what we will be exploring today. It's important that we hear from more women. So I thank you for joining me and taking the time to be here with me.
Thank you.
So before I get into the main subject of this podcast, you are a doctor of psychology, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So there's certain knowledge and experience that you have that I am still pursuing in different ways. I have what I have and you have what you have, but tell us a little bit about your experience and how'd you become Dr. Sylvia Kalicinski, and how that journey was, and how did you get to where you are today as a marriage and family therapist?
Absolutely. Well, I do have a very unique path. I think that has brought me to where I am today. I originally wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. I, from the beginning, always loved listening to people's stories. I, in the very beginning, wanted to be an actress. I loved acting. I was very much into theater in high school. But when I got to college, I just didn't like that whole I won't even get into it, but like that kind of that male hierarchy, this undermining kind of position that I felt like a lot of female actresses would get into. So I put that on hold and I said, well, documentary filmmaking. There I can really pursue my passion of hearing people's stories. I can be behind the camera and explore like my creativity, travel around the world. So that's what I actually pursued at first. My undergraduate degree is in radio, television, and film. I studied at the University of Texas at Austin, and I was really into it. And I actually started working first in Miami when I graduated as a production assistant, then working at different media companies, and ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was an associate producer. Small town at the time, Phoenix wasn't really that big yet. So we were just doing a lot of marketing videos, educational videos. And at the time, I wanted to improve my writing, because actually when I was your age, I was like, I'm going to write a book. I was like, okay, 25, I'm a producer, I'm going to write a book. So I wanted to polish up my writing skills. So I took a class called, I think it was called like Obsession. And what it ended up being was a creative writing course that had a lot to do with psychology and Carl Jung and exploring the shadow. And I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. I love this stuff. And when I went back to work, I was interviewing one gentleman for a Boys and Girls Club fundraising video. And there was this point where he was telling me about his father, who at the time was homeless, and he had lost touch with his father. And in a way, I felt really uncomfortable that I was asking him such personal questions. And in a way, it was for the benefit of the video and entertainment. And I felt there was something didn't feel right. I was like, you know what? I'd rather be asking these questions as a therapist as opposed to a producer. So I'd asked my writing professor at the time, if you could go back to school and get your master's in psychology, where would you go? And she said, Pacifica. Like, Pacifica? I've never heard of that school. So it was a small graduate school in Santa Barbara. And long story long, I basically left the world of producing and went back to school at 25 and got my master's in psychology. And that was at the time I was like, okay, I'm going to also write a book about mother loss, because I lost my mother when I was 3 years old from a brain aneurysm. So I said, okay, I'm going to write a book about that story. Still haven't written it. Then I really got into, the whole depth psychology, Carl Jung, and I realized how much work I needed to do on myself, how much healing I needed to do, because what was really happening was I was starting to grieve for the first time at 25 the loss of my mother. So for me, it was like a dual process, studying psychology, but starting my own path of healing and therapy. And so fast forward, after I graduated, started working in LA at the Carl Jung Institute. And it's a different approach. It's more of, analysis. Most people need to commit at least to a year of therapy if they're going to go into that route. But I loved it. And I felt that being a therapist, especially from that kind of angle and getting into analysis, was as close to a documentary filmmaker I could still be, because each person was coming into, my office or the therapy room with the story of their life or stories that have shaped them. And I still to this day find it extremely special and sacred to have the privilege of being a therapist, because, people open up in that therapy room in ways that they don't open up even to their family or their close friends, or even to their girlfriends, boyfriends, spouses, whatever. So it's such a unique role that I hold with high regard, and I never take it for granted. But just to be able to hear people's stories at such an intimate, vulnerable, and raw level is incredible, and I find it even more gratifying, I think, than documentary filmmaking, because at the end, people still act different when there's a camera in front of them. So I moved from LA to Miami about 12 years ago. I stopped counting at 10. And I started working actually with kids who had been on probation and either were sent to jail or to juvenile correctional centers, or were being threatened by their parents to go to residential. So that's, you hear other people's stories, different backgrounds, struggles, etc. And I was always I always gravitated to working with families, as for me, that was kind of one of my sore spots. Because when my father moved to the US, after 3 years, my mom died, and he was a single father raising 2 kids, and my entire family was in Poland. So I never really felt like I grew up having a sense of family. My aunts, uncles, cousins, I mean, I saw pictures of them, but we never really had, gatherings, and we couldn't travel back to visit them. So I always gravitated to working with families. I worked with so many different types of families when I was in California, migrant families, here, families who'd been, dealing with the judicial system and with their children who's also had, been arrested. So that's when I made the decision, you know what, let's get a PhD in family therapy. I love working with families, and I wanted to develop a specialty. And studying family therapy isn't what it sounds like, where you're just studying families the whole time. What you're really understanding and learning is systemic thinking, learning to think in systems. And one of the biggest things that Nova Southeastern University taught me was no behavior happens in isolation. No behavior happens in isolation. And so what that means is that everything's interconnected. And what I think that Nova in their PhD program and their doctoral program for family therapy is really skilled at is teaching, us to think in systems and think in how even in just like our identity, which, I know a lot of your series now is about self-awareness, how our identity is also impacted and influenced by other systems. And so another big question, or I guess way of thinking that Nova taught me, is when you broaden the context, all behavior makes sense. Mm-hmm. When you broaden the context, all behavior makes sense. So you start to think in how context affects human behavior and our identity. And it helps you become less judgmental, and it helps you become more curious and more open-minded. And that was a thing at the time. I was still working in the FFT program, which is called the Functional Family Therapy Program, and helping parents try to open their mind, because, parents can also get frustrated and they're tired and exhausted, and they could be quick to judge and pigeonhole their own children. So helping them kind of open up their minds and think, okay, let's look at all the other things that are influencing your child's behavior. Let's don't just make the child the scapegoat and blame him or her for everything, which is always a challenge, when you're working with parents, because they're like, what do you know? This is my child, etc. But I think in general, going to Nova has just helped me be a better therapist and think in systems, and it really kind of, for me, created that bridge to embrace mindfulness, which is a big tool that I use with clients. And mindfulness is learning how to pay particular attention on purpose to the present moment while suspending judgment. And so many of us judge, right? We live in a world where judgment is normalized. And if anyone who's listening to this thinks that they don't judge, well, I would encourage them to observe their thoughts even more, because either we're judging ourselves or others. And it's not necessarily something we can stop, nor does Jon Kabat-Zinn, the person who's really accredited, or who's given most credit for bringing mindfulness into modern society. But even him, he says, I'm not talking about mindfulness in a way for us to stop judging. It's more to learn how to suspend it, to observe it. And again, you start thinking in more systemic ways, and you start looking how things are interconnected. And hopefully with that, you start to become more curious, more open-minded, and much more flexible in the mind.
That's wonderful.
That was a very long answer.
That's okay, because that's okay, because this is I think you bring up an interesting perspective from both academia, experience, which we will explore in a few seconds here, but I think just even from the start, you wanting to pursue documentary filmmaking and actually pursuing it for a period of time. I mean, wanting to know the story and wanting to create the story, to create the narrative based on people's real life experiences. I had a lot of things I was listening to there that I was that were striking me and resonated with me in different areas. So although it was a mouthful, it was wonderful. And I appreciate you giving it in detail, because it gives me a lot of context of where you've been, where you are now, and maybe what the trajectory may be for you. Just to touch on some major points, and I think these are huge points, and especially for today's topic, you talked a lot about this thinking in systems. All right. Can you break down what thinking in systems mean in the layman's terms, and exactly if you have 3 examples of what type of systems of thinking that you've used with clients or families or children that you've seen that worked, or around the same lines?
Okay. I have a hard time breaking down theories sometimes to try to make it sound simple, because I love to talk and I'll just ramble. I think, let me try this. I think maybe the most simple way to describe systemic thinking is to open your mind and observe how things are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's opening up your mind and getting curious about how people and structures and ways of thinking influence each other. And for me, I work at a local hospital here in Miami, and I work in an outpatient behavioral health center. And so the program I work in, it's called IOP. So it's intensive outpatient. So these are people who've experienced some kind of crisis or some kind of mental health symptoms where they're just having a hard time functioning in their life or in their relationships. So when they come in to group therapy, one of the things how I try to teach them about systemic thinking, or how I try to teach them how other things are influencing their thinking, is like this. So I draw a circle, which is called a behavioral feedback loop. So I start with an event, right? We have events or triggers that affect us, right? As soon as that event or that trigger happens, there's this whole interpretation process that a lot of people are not aware of. And in that interpretation process, we've got that self-talk going on. We're telling ourselves a story. Well, this means that, and that means that. And she's what she's trying to do is this, et cetera, et cetera. So we're telling ourselves something, and then we're giving meaning to that event. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people are not aware of that, and they go from that event to an emotion. And from that emotion, whatever it is, it's going to create some sense of urge, like an impulse. And based on that impulse, there's going to be some behavior that follows. And based on that behavior, there's a consequence. And so where I try to slow it down for my clients and my patients at the hospital, I said, okay, let's look at this space where you're interpreting, where you're telling yourself this story. And most people don't realize that the story that they're telling themselves about whatever just triggered them is often based on a pain point. Now, that's like a trendy word now for social media. Everyone's like, well, you got to talk to your audience's pain points. Pain points, those are those insecurities, those points that still hurt us, or those things that we still struggle with in life, past wounds, current wounds. And so pain points are usually, to me, those self-limiting beliefs that we adopted based on some kind of defining moment. But then I take it to the next level. I'm like, okay, so one of my pain points is abandonment, right? If I would put it in a straightforward interpretation, it was, I wasn't wanted, right? Or I'm not wanted, right? Or I wasn't good enough for you to stay, right? The sense of a lot of different events in my life where I perceived myself being abandoned. And so that pain point often still will be a filter for things that happen. That's still a story I'll tell myself. Whether I still observe it or not, it still affects how I feel, how I act. But then I try to take it to the next level. I said, guys, not only is it just your pain point that often informs your story, let's go outside of that circle. there are all these other systems that have shaped how you interpret life, how you interpret events, how you interpret things, not just your pain point, but you have your family of origin. You have the culture you were born in. You have the socioeconomic class that you belonged to when you were born, or that maybe you changed out of and that you are in now. You have race, gender, all the other like structural power, structural racism. There's just a lot of different systems that are influencing how you interpret things. So I try to help people not take everything so personal per se, and help them understand there are other things. There are other things that have shaped the way you think. And I think maybe that's a simpler way, is I think thinking in systems is understanding how other influencing factors have shaped the way you think. Go ahead.
No, I think you're peeling back a lot of layers. Just when you speak about it, any conversation like this, when someone's speaking about something that has a lot of layers to it, you begin the reflection right away. And I'm just sitting here thinking what my pain points are, and why do I have my pain points, and where do these pain points come from? And there's a lot of layers to it, doctor. And I know in your practice, your job is to have those clients in front of you and peel back every single layer so you can really get down to the problem. And I think while it's still fascinating, I think it can be a lot for people. I'm sure you can agree with that as you are now. What I want, a particular layer I want to peel back is when you speak about this event, right? Event, or maybe I'll call it like a circumstance, right? How does these events, as now we're going to transition into what the major thought here is, how does these events form beliefs and habits? What does these events do for people? What have you found that these events form? Is it strong habits or strong behaviors, or is it strong beliefs about something because of these events? So the question I'm asking is, how have you seen these events form strong beliefs, and how hard is it to get clients to change that?
Very hard. The first thing I want to say is many of these events shape one's identity. And these events shape people's identity often in ways that they don't realize until later, when they start to experience some form of suffering, whether it's psychological suffering, emotional suffering, physical suffering, spiritual suffering. And so a lot of these events that have happened, I think one term has been used, like defining moments. Sometimes these defining moments shape these ideas of yourself. And then you continue believing that this idea of yourself is true. And then you act, you feel it, and then you act from there. And so, one type of therapy is called narrative therapy, created by a man from Australia, Michael White, and David Epstein. He was from New Zealand. So these two guys actually work with a lot of kids who were in juvenile correctional centers in I think it was Australia or New Zealand. But a lot of their work was focused on helping people to externalize the problem. So when you look at an event, this is where we get screwed up in the head. An event happens, we tell ourselves some kind of story about the event, and we internalize the event, and we take it in as our identity. And we say, this happened, or this happened, or this is happening because I am this way. And so people get confused and they say, well, the problem is not the problem, I'm the problem. And so with narrative therapy, Michael White and David Epstein were trying to help people to identify, look, the problem is the problem. You're not the problem. So to learn how to identify first a problem and then externalize it and separate your identity, because a lot of people, when they internalize that problem, it goes straight to shame. And when the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is an act based on an action, shame is based on your identity. So what ends up happening is with especially anyone who's experienced trauma, they can internalize the trauma, take that in as their identity, then shame starts to drive their behaviors and limits so much of their potential because they got confused. And there's this other fancy term called problematic identity conclusion. So when an event happens, people will conclude that that problem is now a part of their identity, or something in their identity caused that problem. And so they've concluded there's something messed up with me, right? Or there's something wrong with me, as opposed to there's something wrong with the problem and you didn't have the right coping skills to figure out how to best manage that, right? Or maybe the problem was completely out of your hands.
That's huge. And that last piece it feels like almost like a sabotage to our identity, right? That our identity is somewhat, or you may say completely separate of the problem that we're facing. And we all sabotage our identity in the process. I reflect back to when I got released from playing football. The problem was I wasn't performing well. How I took that situation is saying that I'm incapable of performing well in areas of my life. Instead, the problem was I didn't perform well in this period of my life. So I think that identity sabotage is kind of interesting. And is it appropriate for me to call it identity sabotage?
I love it. Take it. Yeah. Like maybe that's your next book.
Thank you. And I think, obviously the book was great, and it was definitely an introduction to the next phase of my life. So I appreciate that, and I'll consider that most certainly. And I don't know enough, so I'm still learning and that's why it's important that I have people of your caliber, your education level to educate me on these things.
Well, even at my level, I still say I don't know enough. I think that's the beauty. I think it was Carl Jung who said, all I know is that I don't know.
Oh, no.
And maintaining that beginner's eyes, no matter where you are, I think is the best way to keep going. Anyone that says that they know it all, run away as fast as you can.
Shoshin is the term, is the Buddhist term. Shoshin, it means beginner's mind, and it's something I practice quite often. So I love that. So tell me, Doctor, I want you to explore how can, and it's as simple as you can. I keep asking for simple because our audience is a little bit younger and they do prefer simpler. How can someone like myself or anyone unlearn identity sabotage, correct? So this episode's really about unlearning behavior and beliefs. Yeah. So how can I unlearn taking on things to my identity? How can I unlearn this way of behavior?
Okay. So I'm going to say something simple and profound and might rock people's world, and they might scratch their head after they hear this. Ready? Mm-hmm. You are not your thoughts.
Ooh. But there's a lot of, that's funny because there's a lot of people saying that you are what you think about, or you are what you continuously believe. So what are we saying? Are we saying that they're wrong, or are we saying that they're right?
All right, I'm going to say it again.
Yeah.
You are not your thoughts. And the thing is, what I think our society suffers the most from is that we attach to certain thoughts and we believe that thought is true, and we allow that thought to shape our identity and influence our feelings, emotions, mood, and our behavior. And we don't realize that we've attached to this thought that is not true to who we are, right? Or there's certain thoughts that we continue to attach to because we've just been conditioned to it. And so when I first say that you are not your thoughts, people are like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm my thoughts. I'm what, like you said, I am what I think. You are thinking your thoughts. Yes, your thoughts influence you, but your identity is not your thoughts. And that's where we get screwed up, because we think, well, how I think is who I am. And so our identity is much bigger than all these thoughts. If you think about it on a neurological, or just like how the brain works, thoughts are just sensations of the brain. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these thoughts are old stories, new stories, and thoughts. This is where it really blows people away. Thoughts that were influenced by people outside of you. Thoughts of other people trying to influence who you are. And so you take that thought, you're like, well, he said I'm this, and she said I'm that, so I guess I'm that. So I'm going to attach to this thought, and this is who I am. And mindfulness and Buddhism is saying, no, attachment is the root of all suffering. So we give our thoughts so much power, Jose, and I'm one of them. Like, I love to analyze. Like, I think it's probably my issue with anxiety. I overthink, and I get attached to all these little thoughts. So it is like another level of martial arts to learn this, like, flexibility. Like, it's like the Matrix. You like observe your thought, but like move around it.
So what thoughts should we allow to, because there's got to be some thoughts that we allow to manifest. I know when mindfulness and meditation, the process of letting thoughts flow through you and not experiencing too much time with them, but allowing them to flow however they flow, negative, positive, allowing them to flow. But what thoughts? I'm sure we have these positive thoughts, these renowned thoughts, with these intuitions. What do we keep? What do we let go of? What do we unlearn? What do we use and what do we unlearn? Like, if we are not our thoughts, then what do we do with some of that intuition that's so commonly talked about?
Yeah. So I think, again, okay, so you're not your thoughts doesn't mean that I don't think you can truly get rid of some, control others. I think the art or the practice is to observe them and become much more flexible. Question them, observe them. Are there some you're going to hold on to? Sure, yeah, you can hold on to some, but even the ones you hold on to, there is a part of your identity, your essence, that is, again, like, has nothing to do with what you're thinking. Like, I mean, I've never played football, but I know in some sports, and I'm guessing in times that you've played, you get into the zone.
Right. When
you're in the zone, are you thinking?
No.
So who are you in the zone if you're not thinking?
I'm a set of practice behaviors.
Could be. But is your identity shaped by those practice behaviors? Is there a Jose that's not thinking, that's in that zone, that your identity, there's something bigger than your thoughts or your practice behaviors, and it's like that energy of who you are, it's there. It's experiencing that moment. Where I feel like some of, like, the most amazing moments we have in life is like when we're not thinking, when we get into the zone and we experience a part of ourselves beyond all that chatter.
Right.
And a lot of people, they don't get it, but I think, it's hard to teach it or talk about it. But when you've experienced it, so if you've been in the zone as an athlete, or you have been able to, like, meditate, or you've just had some moment where you're like, you're not thinking, that part of you that's right there, that's like a little taste of your essence or your identity that reminds you your thoughts don't define you. They influence you, of course. Like, our thoughts matter. But again, who you are does not need to be completely defined by your thoughts. They can inform you, but if you get because, for example, let's say I am great. Well, why shouldn't I think that? I am great. But if you're so attached to I am great, and when you make a mistake and you fail, the suffering is going to be so much more because you're so attached to that thought. I am great. I can't fail. I must never fail. But failure is a part of success.
But what if so this is the part where I understand wholeheartedly what you mean. Mm-hmm. And it's the part where I challenge conversation.
Yeah.
You are in a situation in life, like example, as an athlete.
Yeah.
We are met with these intense competitive situations in our life.
Yeah.
I've been playing football. I was playing football for about 16 years. When I got to college, there was a lot of competition. You have to find every way to get a competitive advantage so you can perform well. So if you're in the locker room telling yourself, I am great, I am powerful, I'm a beast, I can do this. And this is also something I've mentioned in the book, chapter 6, Find What Works. I am great. And we use that for our identity, and we use that belief to help us perform well. And
Right.
it's worked. It's been effective. We felt like we couldn't do it without those beliefs.
Right.
Now that you said we're experiencing that failure, we lose the game, we do bad. Are you saying we should challenge the things that are effective for us? Even those things that work for us, should we be challenging the beliefs we have about ourselves that have been effective?
Well, I always tell my clients, if it works, keep doing it, right? There is no cookie cutter formula that's like, okay, do this, don't do that. Like, by all means, affirmations, I love affirmations. I use them, they work. And so, but what I would challenge is there's a part of you that's bigger than your thoughts. There's a part of your like existence that you can think, I am great, and it's going to help you in your game. Do it again. Do it at work. Do it before you lift weights. Do it before an interview. But at the same time, in terms of like the unlearning part, I don't know, I'll get to that in a second. But I think, yes, do what works, but also be open to that there's still another part of you bigger than your thoughts. Right.
Yeah.
And here's, go ahead. And I think,
no, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to Limitless, the book. One of the parts of the book that helped me the most and that I use with my clients is when Jim Quick talks about our limiting belief systems. And a lot of us, even within our belief systems, we don't realize those 3 letters in the middle of belief, LIE, how they influence us. So Jim Quick refers to the lie that we have in our belief system is the limited idea entertained.
Yes. I remember you reading that as well.
And so here's going back to the idea that you're not your thoughts. When you allow your thoughts to have the hierarchy that most of us give our thoughts, right? And we allow our thoughts to drive our behaviors, and we don't use any other senses, like you said, intuition, then we are then attached to the limited ideas that we continue to entertain. And that, to me, is the hardest part about unlearning, because most people in their belief systems, what is a belief system? It's a repeated thought. It's a thought that's been repeated and conditioned, because not only have you thought about it, you've thought about it again and again and again. So it's a reoccurring thought that has conditioned certain behavior. So your brain has a certain groove to it. And because you've practiced that thought for so long, you believe it to be true until you meet the crisis in your life that's like, hey, you know that limited idea that you've been entertaining for 25 years? Yeah, it's not necessarily true. And you're like, what? But my parents told me this about myself. Society told this about myself. I told myself, I thought this about myself. What do you mean it's not true? And that's when, like, I think when people come to me as a therapist, it's really hard because they have lived their way based on a set of thoughts or a way of identifying themselves. And it takes, first of all, there's usually a grieving process. People get sad, mad, depressed, frustrated, because they're like, how could this way I thought about the world or myself not be true anymore? And I think it's something that you kind of mentioned. It's like we develop these certain beliefs or thoughts, sometimes just as a way to survive our environments. And they had a function. I don't want to take anyone's belief system away and say it's bad. I want to honor them and say, let's thank all of your limited ideas and say, you know what? You helped me survive these environments. So thank you. But now I'm in a different environment, and those set of beliefs or behaviors, they no longer serve me in this environment. And sometimes it's like this grieving process, people letting go of those beliefs, because they're like, but I had this belief for so long. It was like my security blanket. It was always there. I don't know. And that's where I think fear comes in. I don't know the world without this belief.
Right.
Right. People play small for so long to think about playing big. They're like, but I playing small helped me not get hurt in my family. Playing small helped me not get hurt at school. Playing small helped me stay alive. And now you want me to play big?
That's you know, that's it's as you speak about it, I'm thinking that I feel like we all get to that crisis, but it's hard to come to terms with knowing that whether we are so imperfect.
Yes, we are perfectly imperfect.
Right, we're so imperfect that crisis is just, and I'm sure it comes in different forms for various people. Whatever magnitude people want to describe their crisis as, it comes. So it's just interesting to think about that process after the crisis. And as you were talking, I was writing down here. So we have beliefs we have about ourselves, things we've used to survive, which is very prominent in Black communities. Beliefs we use to survive. We've used them. They've worked. We're here. We're finally at a place where we're somewhat effective. We meet the crisis. Now we're having a crisis. We go through the grieving process, allowing old beliefs to die out or to transition, that grieving, that stripping, that's letting layers of the skin drop off, which I think is huge. Evolution tells us that we must evolve or we will eventually die off, right? So that evolving from my old way of thinking is also important. So grieving, so crisis, grieving. Now we're moving into, I guess, the growth period, right? The relearning period where we're learning anew, we're accepting anew. Talk to me about what you've seen in your work and what tools or message you give to the people you work with that allows them to now relearn, grow, and welcome new beliefs, welcome new habits. Tell me about that process.
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to extend and offer my clients is the tool of validation, right? Validation, like validating your story, validating your feelings. And for me, I want to validate, it's absolutely frightening to unlearn things that you're comfortable with, right? It's absolutely frightening to start a new habit or even to take on a new idea of yourself when it's unfamiliar, or whatever other feelings might come up with. But also validating your history, validating, you don't have to get rid of your history or change your history to live the life that you want. And I think it's important to honor your history and honor everything that's happened that has played a part in where you are today. And I use a lot of therapy techniques based on a model of therapy called ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy. And one of the questions that ACT offers in the beginning is, are you willing to accept me as I am? Right? Are you willing to accept me as I am? And really was like all of me, all the parts that I wanted to reject or get rid of, all these feelings I don't want. People who come to me and have these, mental health diagnoses, it's still really hard to live with this idea, wait, I have depression or I have bipolar or, I have borderline personality disorder. I'm like, hey, that's a diagnosis. Your diagnosis doesn't define you. You can unlearn certain things that maybe people have taught you or told you about you and learn new things in there. And so it's the willingness to first try what? To try to feel your feelings, because ACT isn't about feeling better. It's about learning how to feel your feelings better. And Yeah, because there are certain feelings that we're like, I don't want to feel that, right? I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel depressed. I don't want to feel self-loathing. So we stuff it away. We do whatever we can to avoid it, but that's usually what leads to the problem. All the effort that we do to avoid certain feelings, certain memories, the stuff that makes you who you are, usually leads us to another problem. Those avoidant behaviors, alcoholism, drug use, toxic relationships, self-harm, all of that is usually some form of trying to avoid the memories of those early defining moments, the feelings or emotions that you felt from certain relationships or experiences, or whatever it is. So with this question, are you willing to accept me as I am? That's a big question, because a lot of people are not willing to accept parts of themselves. So I think, again, going back to validation, this is a process. This is a practice. There are tools that you can start to learn that you may have never been taught, of how to not only observe your thinking, but observe how you have conceptualized yourself, to observe what you tell yourself. I think the most simplest tool that Brene Brown offers, she's author of so many great books, and is known for her TED Talks on vulnerability, and she's studied shame for years. And Brene Brown says, the thing that helps me learn to observe my thoughts is by just prefacing my thoughts with this. The story I'm telling myself is, okay? Or if, let's say, you're about to have a conversation with your partner and there's something that's been bothering you, and you've got these uncomfortable emotions, and you're not really sure how you're going to tell her, or you're not sure, maybe even before you talk to her, it's like, wait a minute, the story I'm telling myself about the situation is. And right there is going to, first of all, show you certain thoughts that you've attached to a narrative, a story. And then right there is even a hard thing to learn, because you're kind of unlearning that quick, like, I'm going to react to the story. You're unlearning your reactive state and relearning this ability to observe. Like, let me first observe what it is that I'm telling myself. What story am I telling myself? And when you start to learn this technique, you also start to learn how to name feelings. I didn't start naming shame until maybe 6 months ago. I didn't realize how often shame and guilt on a personal level still affect me. My husband says something the wrong way, or I feel like one of my pain points is incapable, right? So if he says something wrong way, pain point, oh, I'm incapable. His tone of voice, his comment, I'm taking that in as criticism, because I still am carrying some sense of shame that I'm incapable. Instead of getting into that whole story, I'm like, wait a minute. Just name it. This is shame. And so I've learned to unlearn telling myself this whole story about who I am or what he's trying to tell me. And then I get defensive. And so just unlearning those behaviors takes practice and time. And so I try to remind my clients, again, this isn't something you're going to learn overnight. Self-awareness, mindfulness, being a human, this is a journey. This is a process, and it takes so much practice, right? We are human beings having a human experience, and it's a complex. And the mind is so complex. So on learning all this stuff, it can be overwhelming. So I just validate. I'm like, validate, this is going to be overwhelming, right? Or here's the last part I'll say. In this work, I'll tell people, look, validate whatever it is that you're feeling or thinking, and say it like this. It makes sense that I would be angry about this. It makes sense that I feel this way. To, again, give yourself permission to be human, give yourself permission to feel whatever it is that you're feeling, whether it's based on facts or that interpretation. Because sometimes we're still looking for that other person to validate us.
Wow.
Right? We'll over-explain ourselves because we haven't validated in ourselves, and we're still looking for that other person. Tell me that what I'm feeling is right. Tell me what I'm feeling is okay. And the person's like, no, it's not okay, because you're blaming me and judging me, so I'm not going to agree with your story. Really, it's us not wanting to, we're not willing to feel what it is that we're feeling. So we jump to blame, and we don't validate our feelings, so we'll jump to blame. We don't validate our feelings, so we'll jump to judgment.
Oh my gosh. It's so much, as you speak about this, doctor, it's what's in my mind that I cannot seem to get out as you speak through these things is two things. One, I feel like what you're speaking about is just a huge body of water. And every belief, every behavior, everything we feel, everything we've experienced is at the bottom of the water. It's tied to a brick, sunken down, sinking down. And if we ever want to understand who we are, why we the way we are, become self-aware, we have to untie those things and allow every bit of it to start floating back up. And that's constantly the thought I'm having. And what I'm believing about the thought I'm having is it makes so much sense. And it makes me want to, even though you've mentioned that we all judge people, we all have our preconceived notions about each other. It makes me want to judge people so much less because I know that that person's probably resurfacing.
Oh yeah.
I may be not resurfacing. Maybe my resurfacing period comes later on, but that person, they're just maybe resurfacing now. They've cut the cord of all that stuff at the bottom of the water. I haven't done it yet. So that's what's going through my mind. This idea of everything we felt and dealt with at the bottom of the ocean, and we finally let it come to surface. And when we see someone dealing with that, we not judge them, but allow those things when they're finally at surface, helping them sort through it. So I thank you for the validation notion, and respecting the feelings for what they are, respecting our beliefs, and not disrespecting them. So I appreciate that. And I just want to share what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
We will wrap up here in a little bit, but I wanted to give you that point. So if you want to reply and comment.
Yes. Let me give you a little nugget. In a book that I use, it's titled Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. It's by Stephen Hayes. He's the creator of ACT, the founder of ACT, Acceptance Commitment Therapy.
Okay.
And so he says, think about this. When the whole, I would say, aim of that type of therapy is to help people make more room for all of their feelings. Because many of us have been taught that certain feelings are bad and other feelings are good, and to not feel the bad ones, right? Collectively, especially in our Western culture, we're taught don't feel bad and do whatever you can to hide it, mask it, ignore it. And in the book, he's saying, imagine you not only making more room for all of your feelings, for your experience, for your history, for your memories, from all of that psychological content that makes you who you are, your thoughts, your memories, your story, all of these personal experiences, your private experiences that you have. Imagine to make more room for that. You are the ocean. You are fully capable of having enough room for all of your experiences. But we think that we're the waves. And those are the thoughts.
All right.
So we think we're the waves. And in the book, he's saying, you're the ocean. You have room for all of the waves. Right. Or think about the sky. You are the sky. You have enough room to contain and hold all of your experiences. You're not the clouds. The clouds are little thoughts. They come and they go. But again, we forget that we are the sky and we think we're just that one cloud.
I'm the sky. Yeah, I mean, there's so much circumstances in life that can make people feel like they're just the cloud, though, which is I'm younger, previously left college, so I understand that very deeply. How I felt like just the cloud, just the waves many times. I felt like a bunch of waves many times.
I mean, every day I get confused. I think I'm the cloud. Every day I'm like, I'm the rain cloud. No, I'm that beautiful thin cloud. No, I'm that ugly cloud. No, and then I'm like, no, Sylvia, it's that's what mindfulness helps me do. Sati, remembering the now. No, you are the sky. You are your breath right now, this moment. There are other things outside of your mind. There's space for it all. And we get tripped up on all these thoughts and we think that we're the thoughts, but you're the sky.
Yes. And it takes me back to what you said in the very, very beginning. when you broaden the context, everything else makes sense. And I think you did a great job just broadening the context of what we were speaking about today. Even in this small conversation, you've took this small idea and broadened it with a lot of education, a lot of background, and just a lot of systems, which I think is kind of interesting because not until recently have I respected systems. I've always been intuitive, able to make changes on my own, and I always liked systems, but I didn't never respected that they're important. And systems of doing, thinking, processing are important. And the greatest companies in the world work with great systems. So
yes,
I thank you for that. And I want to ask you a question here, if you don't mind us going there.
please.
I want to ask you, as a doctor, as a mother, as a wife, as a practicing therapist, as someone who has dealt with the academia and the experience, what have you personally needed to unlearn? And when you unlearned that, how did you grow from it?
I can't believe I'm about to say this. Unlearning perfectionism, right? I am still in denial that I'm a perfectionist because I'm like, things aren't good enough for me to be a perfectionist, because if I was a real perfectionist, things would be perfect. But so the thing is, what I want to say is I make mistakes every day. Every freaking day I make mistakes. And so what I think I'm unlearning is this idea that success is when you don't make mistakes, right? As if they're separated. And so what I'm relearning is that mistakes is not only how I learn, but it is a part of the process, and it's a part of being human. And it's the story I tell myself, because I'm writing a book now about the power of self-talk. So the title of my book is called Hey Ugly.
Hey, nice.
Yeah.
Beautiful title.
And what ugly stands for is you gotta love yourself.
Hey, ugly.
How self-talk affects you. And so, in terms of this perfectionist, it's like, well, I don't have this right, I don't have that right. And talk about self-identity, so much of my self-identity has might have been erroneously based on these limiting thoughts that I had about not just perfectionism, but success. And so what I'm unlearning is waiting for everything, waiting for that moment that I get everything right to be successful, and starting to learn that it's a process, and to celebrate my wins, and to celebrate my human connections, and to celebrate my flaws, as this is what makes me human. And I think the one thing that might attract my clients to me, especially, in my group therapy, one of the things that I think that most of them have shared to me is they say, we appreciate how real you are and how you share your experiences of when you failed, when you made mistakes, because it helps us feel more, I guess, comfortable. So yeah, just unlearning to, or I guess relearning to embrace my flaws, relearning to embrace my mistakes, and then relearning to give it a different language, because language shapes our reality. And when you start to change the words you use to describe your experience, the experience you're living begins to change. It's awesome. Like what I forgot the author's name, but
I'm familiar. Justin Seward mentions him often. I actually have it in my phone here. It's I have it on the tip of my tongue here. It's actually in my book. I know exactly what you're going to say.
When we start to change the way you look at things, the things you look at begin to change.
Yes. Absolutely, yes. I quoted it in one of the chapters, so I do love that quote. Jesus, I love that quote.
Yeah. When you start to change the words you use to describe your story, the story that you're using starts to change. And going back to, I think, documentary filmmaking, you can learn to rewrite your story. by choosing to unlearn certain words that you've used to describe and relearn new words that can empower you and that can also help externalize that problem and give you so much more room to embrace so many other parts of yourself that you don't even know yet. So really unlearning certain words to describe your pain points, and creating a new story and a new way of talking to yourself, because self-talk has such an enormous impact on your self-identity and how you present yourself to others. Okay, last quote from narrative psychology. I love this saying: be careful of the story you tell, because the story you tell might just tell you. Mm-hmm. So I've had to unlearn the story that I would tell everyone about my mother loss, my abandonment, other things, and relearn to tell a new story, so that I'm also relearning to present myself in a different way. Instead of the abandoned child, right? Now I'm presenting myself in a different way that I didn't have room to do that before because I was still stuck on that old story.
You know what? And I'm going to, on that point, that was a very, very powerful quote. And I feel that on that point is a good point to leave it off. I think being careful of the story you tell yourself before that story starts to tell you, I think that's huge. I told myself a different story when I no longer was a football player. I had a different story to tell. It was a story I didn't want to tell. I wanted to tell the old story. And now I'm telling a new story I'm comfortable telling now. So I think that's just a powerful quote. And I thank you for sharing that with me and sharing that with the audience today. And thank you so much for the passionate insight. I can tell that you've dove into your practice head first and you loving it. And
I am. Thank you.
Your ability to go through the systems was wonderful. And I think even as the early pursuit of documentary filmmaking, maybe something you re-pursue at a different time. Maybe you needed to collect these stories, collect these experiences so you can tell them in such a respectful and sensitive way that respects the members or respects the story a little better. I know certainly my partner believes that things happen for a reason and different phases happen for a reason. So thank you for impacting me in this conversation. Thank you for giving us your systems today. And I think that's important because I do a job. I speak vaguely. Sometimes I can speak in circles. Sometimes I don't get to a point, but I'm passionate about it. So sometimes it happens. So thank you for getting to that point for us on a podcast.
Thank you, Jose. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for providing this platform for so many listeners and for following your passions and for showing us how vulnerability can be power through telling your story and telling a different story and writing and going through all of those different things that you went through as you wrote your book. So I just want to thank you for providing the platform of this podcast, but also the platform of your book to impact other people's lives. And it's just wonderful to see someone like you continue to share and be so generous with his knowledge, his experience, and your drive to uplift humanity in the best possible way. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I thank you. And I think this is those rare conversations that you need to revisit, right? This is episode 40. So I think episode 60, 65, I may need you to come back on and give us some more of that expertise. Yes, I think you did a phenomenal job. And
thank you.
I thank you. So I know I follow you on Instagram. I know you primarily on Instagram. Is there any other things you want to tell the audience before we wrap up today? Any small nuggets? We have about 2 minutes left here. So anything that you feel it's on your heart, on your mind with everything going on, is there anything that you want to leave us with today?
Absolutely. Well, I want to leave one quote for you that I heard on a TED Talk. And it's a quote by Rumi. And let me find that little piece of paper here. So Rumi said, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. So anyone who's listening, if you have a moment to, just observe the story you've been telling yourself and ask yourself, instead of why, ask yourself what. Because why usually goes or leads us to more anxiety. What can provide solutions in a different perspective? So instead of why me, you can ask yourself, what's most important to me right now? Instead of asking myself, why do I feel so terrible? You can ask, what are the situations that make me feel terrible? What do they have in common? To me, where I think people can also really start to make an impact on themselves, especially changing themselves, is to truly make the commitment to start loving themselves. We can all be so hard on ourselves. And if you are listening to this podcast, if you could just take this moment right now and ask yourself, am I willing to take myself as I am now? Am I willing to start loving myself right now? And if you say yes, I hope, and I hold the space for you to start taking the action, small action steps to truly start loving yourself. And one way is observing your thoughts, observe your breath, observe how you judge yourself, observe how you judge others, and start to make those small little interventions and change the whys to what, and commit to loving yourself in the most authentic way that you can.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it. And we'll leave it off on that. Thank you for being a guest, and we'll connect soon. And this conversation was impactful.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing your podcast, and I will continue to be one of your biggest fans.
Awesome.
Bye.
Hey, what's up? I hope you enjoyed that episode with me and Dr. Sylvia. Please continue to rate, review, and share the podcast. And until next time, positivity is contagious and attitude is everything.